Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock. This is Gaiam TV, and we're here with another incredible episode, going into the deepest mysteries that have been locked away for eons of time. Humans existing all throughout the cosmos, far more ancient than anyone who's ever been on Earth, and a plan for human evolution written into the mind of the galaxy. In this episode, I'm going to argue that humans have been visiting us for a long time, and they are the ones who gave us the prophecies. Now, here we're going to actually see what they look like from paintings, from sculptures, and we're going to have archaeological digs where we find the skeletons and see the remains of these people. We're also going to discuss once again the prophecies of what they gave us and where it's going. And one of the benefits of being a Gaiam TV subscriber is that you get to ask me questions, and we pick the ones we like the best, and you then submit those questions to us on a video. And if your video is good quality, keep the question to less than 60 seconds, we will use it on the show. So you'll be here on my screen, and everybody will get to see you. You do a nice close-up on your face in the camera. Everybody will get to see you in my show. And I do believe that this is going to be something that will survive for a long, long time. I'm taking a lot of my best material that used to cost $295 to see for the weekend. And I'm taking a lot of that material and putting it into this show, specifically because I want the information to be available to people at a much lower price point, and I want it to be immortal. I want this to really last. And when you're a Gaiam TV subscriber, you get access to over 5,000 unique spiritual metaphysical titles, as well as health and fitness videos, over 50% of all the yoga videos that have ever been made. And I know that you can go to the store and buy those and spend a lot of money, but they're all available here. So that's some of the benefits of membership. I highly recommend it. Today we're going to talk about the prophecy of the Founding Fathers. I'm going to recapitulate some of what I said before. And we're going to go a lot deeper into meeting the people who gave us these prophecies, who gave them to the Founding Fathers in the first place. The Great Seal of the United States on the dollar bill, as I've been saying, is very enigmatic because we see Annuit Septis and Novus Ordo Seclorum. Annuit Septis actually translates as year begins, Annu, annual, Septis, conception. And that means the great year, the 25,000-year cycle. Novus Ordo Seclorum was deciphered by Charles A.L. Totten. He told us what it means. He's a Civil War hero, as I said, and here he is, 2 different stages of his life. He wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury in which he said that it was quoted from Virgil in his 4th eclogue from the mystic Sibylline records, channeled by this lady, the Sibyl of Cumae. And the punchline here is she was the most accurate psychic of all time. These prophecies were the most highly guarded treasure of the Roman government. And the prophecy says, a mighty order of ages is born anew. That's where Novus Ordo Seclorum came from. It says that the Virgin and Saturnian kingdoms will return. Now, who the heck is that? Virgin and Saturnian kingdoms? They're talking about the gods. And they're saying a new progeny is let down from the lofty heavens. Now, I will argue that this is a change that we're all going through, and the gods were the people using the Sibyl of Cumae as a channel to speak through. They furthermore said, the boy will be born in whom the Iron Age comes to an end, and the Golden One will arise again in the whole earth. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that's very exciting. The boy will soon be born in whom the Iron Age, that's where we've been up until 2012, shall come to an end, and the Golden One shall arise again in the whole earth. It's talking about the ascension. It's talking about the transfiguration of the physical human body, which is the natural birthright that we all have as souls, as I've been arguing with this source field information. We live in a living universe. Humans are all over the galaxy, and we are built to ascend. We are built to change and to transform, and that's where this prophecy is taking us. So in the prophecy, it goes on to say that wickedness will be done away, no more of these fake terrorist attacks like September 11th, no more tyrannical governments that say one thing and do something else. We will be freed as a planet from never ceasing fear. And it says that we will receive the life of the gods, meaning we will gain their abilities and we will see heroes and gods commingling. Heroes are people who are actually half god, half human. They're hybrids, basically, offspring of extraterrestrial humans mating with people on Earth. But here it also, I think, is referring to just literally people who are heroic on Earth. And he, this boy who will soon be born, will be seen as a god and reign over a world at peace. This is talking about us reigning over a peaceful world. Now, the smoking gun to how this could all actually happen is interplanetary climate change, as I argued in the last episode. Solar activity is the highest it's been in, wait for it, 8,000 years. That's very, very significant. Mercury has grown a magnetic field. It's actually getting magnetic tornadoes, and these blue spots are where the magnetic field is getting the strongest. Venus has gotten 2,500% brighter on the night side. It's glowing green from activated oxygen. Mars is actually having clouds appear in its atmosphere that were not there before. It's also having global warming at the poles. We also see Jupiter growing a plasma torus, which wasn't even there before 1974. It's grown more dense by 200% just between 79 and 95. And notice they don't keep releasing these data points anymore. The new stuff is getting buried. 50% increase in the density of the particles, and it's having raging thunderstorms, global warming, leading to these huge hotspots that they found in 2008 for the first time. Saturn is growing a plasma torus, 1,000% increase in that donut that you see, the red one there. The little black dot in the middle is Saturn. And then we're seeing this new ring that just appeared the last few years. It wasn't there before at all. Then we go out and see these red spots growing at the poles that were not there before. That's new as of 1995. And massive X-rays bursting out from the equator in 2004. A massive storm appeared just a couple of years ago, the biggest we've ever seen. Look at the size of this monster. Covers 2/3 of the northern hemisphere of Saturn, rages across the hemisphere. The mainstream media doesn't know what to make out of this. They talk about it, but they don't say how all the other planets are changing as well. They only ever mention one planet at a time. Are you noticing this? I'm giving you NASA data, but NASA didn't tell you this. NASA's charter says it's a defense agency of the United States government, and they can classify any information that is deemed bad for national security. So they don't want you to know this. Why? Because it would appear to be fulfilling Islamic prophecy, biblical prophecy, Buddhist prophecy, Hindu prophecy of the coming of the Satya Yuga, the Golden Age. They don't want you making this connection. I want you to make the connection because I want you to see where this is all taking us. Uranus, as I said, was featureless as a cue ball in 1986. By 1999, it's getting hit by huge storms, really big changes. And we see this incredible brightness increase where new stuff is growing, especially over here on the right. Notice all those clouds that appear in such a short time. And they're in a nice little geometric pattern, as you notice. There's 4 of them in a line. Neptune in 1989, this is what it looked like. No real bright clouds. But between 96 and 2002, we see an incredible 40% brightness increase in the near-infrared range, which means you can't see this in your telescope with the naked eye, but if you have an infrared sensor in your telescope, this is what you would see. We start out in 1989. This is what it looks like by 1996. You start to see some spots, not too many. By 1998, it grows to this, and watch how much it grows as we head into 2002. It's incredible. You're watching the whole southern hemisphere just lighting up as if somebody turned on the lights inside a lampshade. And Pluto is moving away from the sun, which means it's moving into a colder region of space, but there's a 300% increase in its atmospheric pressure. That's caused by basically carbon dioxide sublimating. That means it's like dry ice. This solid carbon dioxide, carbon ice, is actually turning into gas, and that's what's increasing the pressure from the global warming of the solid ice. It goes and just turns into gas. Now, Obviously, this means Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. They are happening throughout the solar system, and there's all kinds of weird stuff happening on Earth that cannot be explained. We're seeing a continuous rise in earthquake activity. If you only look at earthquakes above 2.5 on the Richter scale, from 73 to 95, that number is not going to change based on new earthquake detector stations, because the ones in 73 were worldwide. So you cannot explain this as, oh, well, they just built more earthquake detectors. No. Anywhere in the world that there's a 2.5, we knew about it in 1973. But look at how much has changed, 400% increase. That's not greenhouse gas, that's not SUVs, that's an internal physics change in the Earth. And we see it with volcanic activity. Notice that here's 1875, and this is about half of all the volcanoes in the world. Half of all the volcanoes in the world, this is what they were doing in 1875. This is what they're doing in 1993. An incredible, incredible increase of 500% in volcano activity. So the greenhouse gas model, yes, I do not think we should be burning fossil fuel. I do not want us polluting our atmosphere. I think it's a horrible thing. It's causing acid rain. It's causing pollution. It's bad. But it doesn't explain what we're seeing in galactic energies changing the solar system like this. Greenhouse gases are not enough of an explanation to account for what's going on here. We are seeing an increase in galactic dust. Just in 2000 and 2001, there was 300% more galactic dust coming into our solar system than in all of the 1990s. Now, I'm arguing that that's actually caused by us orbiting the companion star next to the sun, and that as we move into this region where we're closer to the black sun, which is like a brown dwarf, we're moving into all that extra dust that it's giving off. There's way less dust out here. When you go out here, there's no dust at all, but we're moving closer. We're crashing into that dust. It's charging up the solar system with all this new energy, and it's transforming our DNA. That's the literal fulfillment of the prophecies. We are seeing concrete human DNA change. And I gave you the model in this show of how that DNA change can be achieved. Now I want to talk about the people who have already reached this next level of human evolution and have started to come here to teach us about how we're going to get to the same place. These are the gods of antiquity. So who were they, and how did they get here? Where did they come from? I want to talk about the Bible first. This is very important because the Bible is the most extensive record of extraterrestrial contact that's ever been documented. When we look in the Bible, they talk about angels. We have multiple levels of angels. This is very important. The highest one is seraphim, which represents the fiery spirits. They're very high-level angels. We have cherubim, the all-knowing. We have the thrones, which are the ones with many eyes. We have dominions who carry the scepter and the sword. Then we have virtues, the brilliant shining ones. Then we have powers who prevent the fallen angels from taking over the world. And this is going to be a very important point once we meet them and you find out who they are. Principalities, who are guardian angels that guard over cities, nations, and rulers. So it's even, you got to get all that way. So think about this. The powers, they're actually out there around the earth, guarding the earth from these ETs, these bad ETs. It's a war between angels, basically. And they're guarding the earth. And then you got to knock down to the next level just to get to the ones that watch over nations, rulers, and cities. So presidents and emperors and kings and queens would actually have ETs guarding them from the bad guys. And some other kingdoms on earth were actually cutting deals with the bad guys, as we're going to see. Now, in order to understand this and where the Bible is really telling us the truth, you got to look at some of the words and see how their definitions were mistranslated by the Roman government. Why? To keep you ignorant, so that you don't know the truth of who's been here, because back in the old days, ETs were coming and going from the earth all the time. And it's written in the Bible. The word heaven is a big clue. It appears 700 times in the Old Testament, where it appears as the word shamayim in Hebrew. Shamayim becomes Uranos when it goes into the New Testament Greek. In every other document from the same time period as the Bible, except the Bible, Shamayim and Uranos translate as sky, outer space, cosmos, or universe. Isn't that interesting? And every other work besides the Bible, you can go back and read them, and that's how the word's translated. The only reason why it's not that way in the Bible is the Roman government didn't want you to figure out where these people were coming from. Now check this one out. The word God. This is really contentious, but hey, I'm going for it. Elohim is the word, the original Hebrew, and it's plural. It's not a singular word, and the word means mighty ones. Whoa. It appears 2,750 times in the Old Testament. And the Hebrew writers used the word for both benevolent and malevolent entities. Now, I want to point something out here. This data comes from BibleRealityCheck.com. The man who wrote this, who put this research together, is a die-hard Christian. He is not trying to overturn Christianity. It is not some antichrist plot to lure you away from your faith in the Bible. It's more about, let's look at the Bible without the blinders on that the Roman government created for the purpose of creating a government that could be used through religion to control the people. Let's get rid of all that. Let's find out the truth that they wanted to conceal, because they don't want you to know this stuff. What is it that they don't want you to know? Well, first of all, the word angel in the Old Testament is malach. In the New Testament, it comes out as angelos in the Greek. Now, what does that mean? It actually means the one who has been sent. Sent from where? From heaven. Outer space. Isn't that something? The one who was sent from outer space. A messenger or an emissary from where? From heaven. From outer space. A messenger who was sent from outer space. Those are the angels. Those are the good guys too. And they are the mighty ones, extraterrestrial emissaries coming to the earth. Now, we're going to get into some really contentious material here, some very scary and contentious material for a minute, because the bad guys were really, really bad. Beelzebub is one of the names for the devil in the Bible. Baal-zebub, derived from Baal, of course, in the Old Testament, becomes Beelzebub in the New Testament. The Chaldean word Baal means the dark lord, the ruler, the overlord. Baal is the grand master of the evil pantheon of beings in the Old Testament. He's the closest you're going to get to the literal embodiment of the devil. He is Satan. The closest you're ever going to get is Baal. Baal becomes El. El becomes hell. It's all interrelated where this stuff comes from. Baal, hell, El, it's all in there. Now, Zebub, Baal-zebub, a zebub is a fast-flying insect that stings. Thus, he is the Lord of the flies. But what you don't realize is the flying insect is just a metaphor of the craft that he's flying in. And there's many other biblical citations that are going to prove that point. He's the Lord of the UFOs, the bad guys that are coming to the earth, being seen in the sky, and it's all out there. He was a sky god who had flight capability and could sting with the weapons inside the UFO. It's all there in the Bible, and we're seeing UFOs now. Now let's take a look at Baal for a minute. This is a sculpture of people who saw him because he was on earth, and they sculpted what the heck he looked like. Notice that his head is different. He's got this weird long hat on, and it seems like his head is elongated. He's got a longer cranium. Now notice that he's got his arm up. This is because he had the ability to shoot thunderbolts. And in a lot of these sculptures, we'll see, notice here, he's got a ring on the arm that he's holding up. This is the technology that he was using to generate these thunderbolts. Again, notice the enormous skull. He's got this huge, huge hat on. So this is the guy, the most evil god of them all. He's got the Masonic apron on. Notice his apron here. And he's got this hat on that symbolizes the pineal gland. This technology allowed him to shoot those thunderbolts out of his arm. Here's another image where we see the same statue with him being able to shoot thunderbolts and that enlarged head, very large head. Here's another image of Baal where we're seeing the two of them together. These are two different sculptures of Baal, both of which show his head. Now, this is another sculpture after he probably had left. We still see that he's got that funny hat, but now they've tried to make his head a little more normal looking. But again, all the original sculptures, the oldest ones, show him with this very large head. He is human. He is not some weird energy being. He's a humanoid, but he's not from Earth. And here's another sculpture of him. As you can see, he's got a very large head there, and his hair is tied up at the top. Here's another example of him. You can see these sculptures from old times where his head is drawn very large. Here's another. These are really old ones. Now this in the middle, this is the minion of Baal is Moloch. Moloch is shown with the head of an owl or the head of a beast like the ox. And if you notice in this image, is very disgusting tradition that they had of sacrificing babies to Moloch. Human sacrifice. That's where this all started back in the time of the Bible. The valley where this was done was called Ga Ben Hinnom. And in the New Testament it became Gehenna. Gehenna became the garbage dump after the child sacrifices stopped. And Jesus would say that you'd go to Gehenna if you committed sin. But in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus actually said that you could go to Gehenna for something as simple as calling your brother a fool. Are you really going to get sent to hell and burn for all eternity just for calling somebody a fool? No. So Jesus used this, what had stopped being a place of child sacrifice, he then used it as a metaphor to indicate the cycles of karma in which your karma is burned off. But in the old days, these Chaldean gods actually did take child sacrifices, and notice that they're drawn as being larger in size than humans on earth. They were giants. But not all of them were bad. Now, there's a legend in the Bible of these three angels, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were presented to King Nebuchadnezzar, and they looked just like you and me. They looked human, and he said, you guys aren't anything special. You're just people like us. But everybody said, well, they can walk on water, they can fly, they can do all this great stuff. So he said, I want to prove that these people are something special. Set the furnaces burning, that the same furnaces they'd use to sacrifice children. Set the furnaces burning, throw them in there, but make it 7 times hotter than it takes to roast human flesh. That's what we see in this chapter of the Bible, Daniel 3:19, 28, through that section. What we see is the king's high officials gathered around after these guys had been thrown in that oven, and they walked out unsinged. The fire had no effect on their bodies, nor was the hair on their head singed. The king responded and said, blessed be the mighty ones of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent their emissary, i.e. extraterrestrial angel, to deliver their servants. So the good guys had massive magic powers as well. Melchizedek, another good guy, described as an immortal being, no earth human heredity, implied that he is an Et or Elohim, and he was so extraordinary that the Hebrew author would not give very much information about him at all. Deuteronomy, which is a really crazy book because there's some crazy stuff in there. Deuteronomy 33:26 says, there are none like the mighty ones of Israel, i.e. Elohim, who ride from outer space, heaven, to your help and through the skies majestically. These people were here in person. Psalms 68, 33 through 34. To him who rides through the distant cosmos, which is from ancient times, his strength is in the skies. Well, that sounds pretty interesting. He's riding through the cosmos to get here, and his strength is in the skies. You're looking at an extraterrestrial. They're talking about extraterrestrial beings coming to the earth in the Bible here. Here's another great one, Isaiah 19:1. Behold, Yahweh is riding on a swift cloud. Wonder what that means. How did that get translated after X number of rewrites and revisions and so forth? The cloud, of course, is a UFO, and it makes sense because we're seeing the sculptures of Baal. He's got a really big head. He doesn't look like a regular person. We're seeing that outer space is the real meaning of heaven, that emissaries are the ones sent. That's what angel means, sent from heaven, from outer space. They've got their craft. They're riding on a swift cloud. It gets better. Watch this. Isaiah 66:15. Behold, Yahweh will come in fiery chariots that burn like the whirlwind. They're flying like the whirlwind. They're on fire, and they're burning up there in space. They literally look like fiery chariots in the sky. His strength is in the skies. Psalm 68:17. The chariots of the mighty ones are myriads, thousands upon thousands. Yahweh is among them. These were being seen in the sky. Thousands of UFOs in the sky. Now, why has that stopped in modern times? I believe it's because there's a war, and the good guys are prevailing over the bad guys, and everybody had to clear out. The bad guys had to get defeated. Back in the Chaldean times, you had guys like Baal being sculpted with these very large heads, and they're literally accepting child sacrifices. People are sacrificing children right in front of them. That's not nice. But there's been a war going on. That's the real Battle of Armageddon. It didn't just start recently. It's been going on since about 1000 BC, according to the Law of One, and I believe that's true. Let's take another one. I want to show you some of these examples of ETs around the world. Every culture worldwide is showing you human extraterrestrials, and we're going to just start to cover some of them, and we're going to go in even more detail next week. But let's start with Sumerians. The Sumerian gods were actually carved into metallic plates way, way back in the day. We're talking 3500 BC. These are really, really old. Now, no offense to David Icke, who wanted them to be reptilians, but these Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, the Nephilim, if you will, another name they're given in the Bible, they show up wearing these weird wings as if they came in a flying craft. And this is Inanna. This is the female goddess. She's got a human face. Look at the size of the lion compared to her. Isn't that something? And here we have a depiction of what may very well be the Stargate that they came in through, which also could be an indication of our solar system or the sun, and it could be both, but she's much bigger than that lion. Now look at this. Look at these little dudes walking up to the god here, the symbol of the Stargate in the middle. Look at how much bigger he is than them. And here's another guy hovering on top. These people are giants. They're estimated to be 12 to 14 feet tall. There's multiple records in the Bible of people interacting with giants. And then the funniest part to me is that here he is wearing wristwatches. Look at that. You can see that he's wearing wristwatches. So now I'm showing you just the beginning. Sumerian gods that became biblical gods. I showed you the elongated skull, and we have only just started your wisdom teachings on extraterrestrial humans coming to the earth and giving us messages. We'll be back next week here, Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock on Gaiam TV. Thank you for watching. Welcome to Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock. That's me. This is Gaiam TV, an incredible archive of over 5,000 different unique titles that can only be streamed here. And you can send your questions into this show. Ask me about anything you want to know. And if your question gets picked, we'll have you send in a video and you'll be here on my screen asking me a question. We are doing a series of shows in the beginning to build up our arsenal of early content that's going to build our way into the wisdom teachings. But when we talk about wisdom teachings, I want to make sure that we're talking about the full spectrum of where this wisdom has come from. And it's very important to understand that there are humans out there who have been coming to the earth ever since we were here. These humans were not born on earth, but they are human beings because of the nature of reality, in which time and space are all aspects of an intelligent living cosmos. That was discussed heavily in the earlier episodes of this show. Now I want to introduce you to these people, and again I keep focusing on what their message was, because worldwide gods appeared. In this episode you're going to really see that. Those gods gave us a message in hidden mythologies that was not overt, but all these mythologies around the world, according to these two historians, Santayana and Van de Schend, had this hidden information about this Earth cycle called the precession of the equinoxes, which is a seeming wobble in the Earth's axis that takes 25,920 years to complete. That's the magic number. As we've now seen, there's a breakthrough in understanding what this is. It's not just the Earth that's moving. According to Walter Cruttenden, we live in a binary solar system, and our whole entire solar system is orbiting another star. That means that the Earth's axis wobbling is actually being caused by this solar system movement. And the gravitational attraction of this lost star, hence the title of his book, pulls us in as we get closer to the star in this big elliptical orbit. As we move through, we get more energy, and it ultimately seems to be leading to a transfiguration of humans into something more than what we've been up until now, which is programmed ultimately by the mind of the galaxy. Many of these ancient gods gave us this knowledge, and it was kept secret, but the secret knowledge was encoded into the Great Seal of the United States on the dollar bill. What we're seeing here is the phoenix and the pyramid with the eye on top, the eye symbolizing the pineal gland, the phoenix symbolizing the transmutation of the physical body. Novus Ordo Seclorum, as it turns out, is a quotation from Sibyl's mystery school texts, which were transcribed by Virgil. Now, Charles A. L. Totten, a Civil War hero, was the one who said that Novus Ordo Seclorum came from Sibyl's text, which was considered the greatest treasure in Rome due to its accuracy. And she says that at the end of the age, the Virgin and Saturnian kingdoms return, a new progeny is let down from the lofty heavens, and the Golden One arises again in the whole earth after the Iron Age comes to an end. That's a prophecy talking about a transfiguration of what it means to be human on earth, and it's written into the dollar bill, which it's just amazing. It's been right in front of our face. I mean, I've grown up an American. I've had this currency around me the whole time. I didn't know what Novus Ordo Seclorum meant. And when I finally figured it out, I was stunned, because it's actually a prophecy saying that wickedness and evil will be completely cleansed from the earth, will be freed from ceaseless fear, and we shall receive the life of gods, commingle with gods, and be seen like them, and reign over a world at peace together. Now, the interplanetary climate change data is very significant, because as I walked you through that in previous episodes, I showed that all the planets are changing in the same way that we see the Earth changing. And even the Earth itself is having earthquake activity increasing, volcanic activity increasing. There's new energies forming outside the Earth as well in the Van Allen belts that they called New Belt. And that only showed up in the late 1990s. And this is the working scientific proof that gives us a precedent to understand that this Golden Age prophecy has a basis in truth. When we see interplanetary climate change, we're seeing a massive energetic transformation of our solar system. Now I want to take us through a detailed view of who the gods were and what do they look like. But first, let's find them again in the Bible. I'm just going to give you a couple of things I said before. That the word heaven was mistranslated. It appears 700 times in the Bible. Shamayim in the Old Testament Hebrew, Uranos. Shamayim in the Old Testament Hebrew, Uranos in the New Testament Greek, and it translates as sky, outer space, cosmos, or universe. All other works from this time, they're translated that way. Those words are not translated as heaven at all. The word God is plural. It means Elohim, and it means the mighty ones, and it appears 2,750 times in the Old Testament. This is on the website BibleRealityCheck.com, written by a Christian. Very important point. The Hebrew writers used this word to describe both the good guys and the bad guys. So please, let's not get confused here, because I see some of the fundamentalist Christian scholars out there, and they are concluding that every single human that's ever come to the earth has to be evil. That they're all demons, they're all bad. It's like, if that's true, you're not looking at history. You're not looking at what we see in the fossil records, what's been dug up that I'm going to show you today. All that stuff. The word angel, malach in Old Testament Hebrew, angelos in New Testament Greek, translates as the one who was sent from heaven, i.e. from outer space, the emissary of the heavens, an extraterrestrial mighty one who came here to help us out. Isaiah 19:1 says Yahweh is seen riding on a swift cloud. The translation of that seems pretty clearly not the word cloud, but that's the best they could do with the language that they had available to them at the time. Oh, it's up in the sky. Well, it's a cloud. Then in Isaiah 66:15, they don't just stop at cloud. They say a fiery chariot like the whirlwind. Well, a chariot is clearly a craft. It's what the horses draw, and you charge into battle on a chariot. But these chariots are in the sky. The Chariots of the Gods. That's the title of Eric von Daniken's first book. Fiery chariots in the sky. Psalm 68:17, the chariots of the mighty ones, i.e. the messengers from outer space, are myriad. Thousands upon thousands, Yahweh is among them. Now, every culture worldwide shows us these gods. They're not just in the Bible. Irish mythology is loaded with gods. Celtic mythology. Everywhere around the world, they've got gods that came here, civilized the people on earth, and gave us spiritual teaching, which predominantly, in almost all cases, was very positive, loving, spiritual information. And as this television series goes on, you're going to find out that that information has never stopped being given. They're still here, they're still showing up, and they're still giving us wisdom teachings. And I want to get to that, but there's a lot of material that's pretty important to go through first to get there. So every culture has these guys. Now in the Sumerian culture, they are the Anunnaki or the Nephilim. And you see here, Inanna doesn't have a reptilian face. Her face looks very human. And she's totally dominating the lion. She's got telepathic control over the lion. The lion looks a lot smaller than she does. These people are 12 to 14 feet tall. That's a pretty interesting point. Then we see this guy. Look at how big he is compared to the people off to the left. That's how normally big they were. They were giant humans, and there's giants in the Bible. Then when we go to Egypt, we see Egyptian gods who clearly have unusual features. These Egyptian gods are also given temples in which the doorways, in some cases, are very tall. Look at the height of the people here, and then look at the height of the rest of the door compared to the people. I mean, that doorway is enormous. An Anunnaki could walk in that door very easily with no trouble. Osiris, the Egyptian god, he's the first generation. He's got green skin, and sometimes he's pictured with other people who don't have green skin. That is not a genetic defect. It is not paint. It is his natural skin tone. Also notice he's got this really long hat on. Very interesting. Now the Osirian is allegedly something he built next to the Sphinx from the blocks that they used to quarry out the Sphinx. It's made of huge 100-ton stone blocks. And as we see here, like this lintel piece over the top of this doorway here, that sucker alone is worth like 100 tons in weight. So it's tremendously heavy. Now, here is an Egyptian illustration of Osiris with green skin next to others who clearly do not have green skin. So something different about this human being. And you'll notice that the hat is very long and it's got a symbolic pineal gland on the top. That's, I believe, what they're talking about there. Next, we go to Akhenaten, who's, I guess, 14 or 15 generations after Osiris. And he really was a good guy. He was trying to turn the religion around, get rid of pantheism, return it to monotheism, create a positive spiritual society. And there's a lot of scholars who believe that Akhenaten and Moses were the same person. There's whole books you can read just on that. And there's a lot of parallels between their stories, enough so that it very well could be just two names for the same guy, two different historical accounts. But look at his head. Now, if Akhenaten is Moses in the Bible, Moses was able to turn his staff into a serpent. He was able to part the Red Sea. Maybe that's because he was an extraterrestrial and he had advanced psychic capabilities. Look at the size of this head on him. And also notice that his hat looks like the edge of a UFO. That might not be an accident. That might be a stylized version of the ship that he came in with, and that's the hat that he wears around this very large cranium. Now we see these old illustrations of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and look at their kids. Look at the spindly arms on those kids and their elongated skulls. This kid's head is not normal. Look at the size of the skull going in the back. Same here. And look at these long spindly arms. Also notice their rib cage is narrow and they got that funny pot belly. You're going to see a lot more of that. This is on display, this is on display at the National Museum in Berlin, in Germany. Here's another example of Akhenaten with a large head and his family. You can see him up close there. Here's another example of them. Now look at the kids. Once again, they've got very large heads. They're bald except for this thing that he's wearing like a hairpiece. They have these narrow ribs. They have that funny pot belly. And there's three kids in the illustration. There he is again with his elongated skull. And there's that funny narrow rib cage and the big pot belly. Nefertiti, this is a bust of Nefertiti. Notice the size of her head. That hat is huge. And there's other pictures of her where she doesn't have the hat on. But these are all on display in Germany. There's an illustration of her with the funny pot belly, and notice her elongated skull in the back. Here's a close-up of that. You can clearly see it looks different. The serpent coming out the top of the hat indicates that her kundalini has risen and she's activated her pineal gland, meaning that she has psychic capability. There's another illustration of her with a large head. And there it is again. There's one of the daughters with the funny hairpiece on of wings indicating that they came in a flying craft, and she's holding a staff that's a symbolic pineal gland. And there it is again. There's another one on the right. You can see her head is bald there. Now here's Nefertiti without a hat on. Look at that head. Look at how huge it is. This is on display in the Berlin Museum, once again in Germany. And you can clearly see that there's something strange going on here. This is their daughter now, Meritaten, and we see that her head is extended. Now this is carved out of granite. Do you think for a minute that if this artist did this as a style and that that's not what they really looked like, that he would have even made it out of that room alive to turn them into these bald monstrosities with these extra long skulls? No. This is what they looked like. They posed for this illustration. Here's another one on display in Germany where you can clearly see the elongated skull in the back. These people were walking around just like you and me, but they didn't come from here. They came from outer space. It's so obvious. Here's another image of Meritaten. Notice the hairpiece that she's wearing. Look at how big that skull is in the back. Again, this was carved based on her posing for the picture. Now, I don't know. Somehow it's not sexy. It doesn't do it for me. You know, maybe if she put it on both sides of the head, that'd be a little different. But one side and then all crazy bald on the other, it's probably a look that is just outdated for our time. But anyway, when you put that hat on, you can see that with that enlarged cranium, it's not so difficult to fit that hat on anymore. It fits snugly. Now, in a previous episode, I talked about the Chaldean god Baal, the ultimate overlord of the evil beings in the Bible. He was the god that ruled over Moloch, all the fallen angels. He was the guy. He was the lord of the flying insect that stings. Beelzebub, the lord of the flies. And look at his head. Look at how big his skull is. It's just like what we see in Egyptian mythology. These are the same folks coming to two different cultures, and he's actually got the same kind of skull. He's wearing that ring on his arm, which he used as a technology to give the thunderbolts, which terrorized the people, because he could shoot beams out of that thing and cause all kinds of destruction to occur. Now, not all of them were bad. Now, Akhenaten was really trying to turn things around here. This is his son Ramses. You'll look at the arrow there, and you'll notice that Ramses' skull is, again, quite large, which is totally fitting. There's also a very different shape to their body because the rib cage is extra narrow, and there's that funny pot belly again. This is a life-size carving of Nefertiti, unfortunately without the skull, but we can clearly see that these people have physiological differences. No matter how many times they go to the gym and do crunches, they're never going to get washboard abs. Sorry guys, you're always going to have that funny little pot belly that looks sort of like an old-fashioned oil lamp. That's just the way it goes. Here we have another illustration of Akhenaten with that very narrow rib cage and the pot belly once again. Here's that illustration of them with their kids. You can clearly see the skulls that are elongated. And as we go on here, this is a line art tracing of an illustration that they found in one of the temples, in which the people on the left, this is traced over on paper because the original was very hard to see. The people on the left have ordinary human skulls and they're bowing in supplication. The people on the right have elongated skulls and they're all wearing a disc with wings coming off of it. Isn't that interesting? I wonder what that means. Well, think about it. A flying disc. That's what they came in on. Their skulls look different. Lots of people are seeing UFOs now. If even one UFO sighting is actually not swamp gas, then we're not alone. And you cannot tell me that every single eyewitness to the UFO phenomenon is lying. You got to tie in this old stuff to understand what's going on now, and that there's bad guys out there, Anunnaki types. That's one type of Anunnaki with the elongated skull, about the same height as us. There's other types that are taller, but there's good guys and bad guys in this battle, Akhenaten being one of the good guys. His son, King Tut, also has the elongated skull. Here's a statue of him with a weird big hat on. Here is a rare bust of him. You see from the front, he looks pretty normal, but from the side, his skull is punching out a lot more than it's supposed to. Now, another very interesting set of illustrations of these gods comes from a series of 30 Greek islands. And they are in a series of 30 Greek islands called the Cycladic Islands. And you can see them here below Greece, and they carved the Cycladic figurines. So it seems that the same gods once again visited the people in the Cyclades, in these 30 islands, showed up. The Cycladic people had no, let me try that again. The Cycladic people had no written records, so we don't really know anything about these people, but it appears that they were highly revered. Let's see some Cycladic figurines. From the front, we see that they look pretty normal. They always seem to be drawn as if they're too cold, that gesture with the hands crossed over the front of the chest. But when you start looking at them from the side, oh my gosh, they've got this elongated skull. They're very into music. They're shown playing flutes. The guy on the right is playing one of those double flutes where you get the bass notes on one side like a drone, and then on the left you can play other notes. The guy on the right seems to be playing a harp or a lyre. There's several sculptures of him doing that. And isn't it interesting how similar he looks to some of these illustrations of Baal from the Chaldeans? It's the same thing. Look at the guy in the chair in this slide and tell me that it doesn't look the same as what you're seeing right here. It's the same gods coming to different cultures, Here's another illustration of a series of Cycladic figurines. These are all originals. Look at how big the skull is. Look at the one down there on the right. And look at the one on the left. They're drawn, stylized with these elongated skulls, and they play music, they play their instruments, and they're always drawn with the same interesting gesture, usually females. Some of them can be quite large, as you see here. But these are stylized illustrations of the gods with their elongated skulls. Just a little bit of artistic license in the way that they're being drawn. And again, very similar to the way that Baal looks. And this guy, of course, really bad news, the equivalent of Satan in the Bible. And he was here. He was real. This guy is still out there, and we're still fighting him, but we're winning. So all this stuff starts to tie together. You see, it's all forming linkage points, and the same people were visiting different areas. Of course, the god Moloch was one of the underlings, or the minions of Baal, and there he is in the middle, wearing this stylized bull head, which is really just a mask for what he's got on underneath. Now, in the Hindu tradition, we have gods and goddesses. Vishnu is drawn with blue skin, and notice that he's got 4 arms. That could be a time traveler, somebody who's not quite in our linear time, and as he moves his arms, you see these like strobing illustrations of where his arms are, because you're looking at him in the past, present, and future from our vantage point. He's also drawn flying on a lotus. That could very well be an illustration of a UFO. He is on some flying craft as he's drawn flying through the air. They're also drawn not only with blue-skinned humanoid features, but also a lot larger than native Earth women. Look at the size of the woman compared to him. And there's the guy up there in the clouds on a lotus. This is a very, very old illustration of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And I believe you're looking at 3 different types of extraterrestrial immigrant humans here, because the women are substantially smaller than these guys. The guy on the right is a giant with regular Caucasian-type skin. The guy in the middle is a giant with blue skin, and the guy on the left is a giant, but he seems to be unstuck in time, and he has 4 heads. And I've heard from insiders that there's a type of ET that actually does project its face so that anybody standing around it 360 degrees, you're going to see the face as if it's looking at you. And that's where this legend of the 4-headed god comes from, is they project an image. They're basically a light being. That would be like your seraphim, cherubim, the very high-level gods, the very high-level angels in the Bible. Okay, now we go to Norse mythology. We see the god Odin. Odin has magical tools, a spear that he can use to eliminate his enemies, just like Baal had thunderbolts. We see the Irish god Hearn clearly shown levitating. He's got his eyes closed and he's hovering off the ground, holding a serpent, which again indicates activated pineal gland. And oh my God, look, there is the same thing in his hand that Baal had on his arm. The one that Baal had on his arm even had a little ball in the middle of it, just like his does. This is the magical tool. This is the extraterrestrial technology that they would wear that allowed them to do things like levitation and creating beams of energy that they could blast people with. The Celtics had a giant named Dagda, as you see here. Look at him holding onto the arms of the smaller people beside him. The Celtics had Mercury, which also shows up in Greek mythology, another human god. Over in the Mesoamerican area, we have Quetzalcoatl, a white-skinned god who appears in Mesoamerica. And look at that. It looks like he's got a stylized space helmet that he's wearing. Very interesting. It's the head of a serpent, of course, and it represents actually the conjunction with the center of the galaxy in 2012 that he was coming to prepare us for. But he's also got these, it looks like pineal glands around his necklace. And Quetzalcoatl had white skin in an area where nobody else did. That's why when Cortez showed up in front of Montezuma, Montezuma thought Cortez was a god, because that's the only people they'd ever seen that had white skin before. Now, Viracocha is another Mesoamerican god, and he's shown with some very distinguished features. He's got unusually large eyes, especially look at the left and the middle. The oldest looking carvings of him, his eyes are much too big. And also he has this funny little round mouth. Now we head further north, and we see the Hopi have the Kachina. This is an actual illustration of them. They have that weird little round mouth again, a very wide face, and the eyes are quite large, unusually large. And he happens to have Elvis Presley-style lamb chop sideburns, just thrown in as bonus points, just in case you weren't already hip enough to him. The king might have reincarnated more than once, let's just put it that way. So then we go to Japan and we have Anemono Toribune, bird boat universe is how that literally translates, and it means the flying boats from the universe. That's in the Shinto legend. Now, who came out of the flying boats from the universe? The Dogu. This is a sculpture of the Dogu, one of the oldest sculptures they find. He's got a very sophisticated looking outfit on, almost like a spacesuit, and look at his head. Notice that he's got that same funny tie on the top of his head, how his hair is tied up, just like we see with Baal, just like we see with the Egyptian gods, same kind of thing. And as time goes on and these people disappeared, they get more and more distorted in the way that these sculptures look, to the point where eventually you get all eyes on the head. I don't believe that's how they started out looking. I think that's just the distortion of where it ended up going. But then we had Dogon, we have Dogu in Japan, and then we have Dogon in Africa. Now look at this. This is an eyewitness carving of what this guy looked like. He's got a really tall, spindly body. Dogon, Dogu sound very similar. Look at his head. Look at the size of those eyes. They cover almost half of his face. That's very peculiar. The Dogon said that they came from Sirius, and in Robert Temple's book, The Sirius Mystery, pun intended, he illustrates how the Dogon gave a legend that they came from that dog star, Sirius, and indicated that there was a smaller star next to it, which has now been proven. It's called Sirius B. They had all kinds of specific technical detail in Africa about Sirius that they could not have known. So you start looking at this stuff, you start putting the pieces together, and you say, wow, something's going on. Now, down under, they got the Greys. They were called the Wangina. Look at these cave illustrations. Look at these people. They look just like modern reports of Greys. Here's another illustration of them. And here's another one where, again, the head seems to get wider over time. And here we're seeing, it almost looks like Edvard Munch's The Scream. Scary looking faces, but they look like the Greys. And then in the Greek religion, the Greek tradition, we have the Greek gods. Here's Zeus looking very human. Here he is again. Here's another illustration of him. I don't believe the horns are literal. They were poised on Mount Olympus, which it says in the Greek legends that Mount Olympus could take off and fly into the air. So they're parking their ship on top of the tallest mountain. And they were ruling over the people. When I looked at the Greek mythologies in high school, I'm like, boy, these people don't seem very evolved for gods. They're fighting with each other. They're firing bolts at each other. Zeus fires off his thunderbolts. And as we go into next week's episode, I'm going to show you archaeological evidence, actual skeletons that have been dug up of these beings. If you still don't believe that these people really walked around on Earth after everything I've showed you, come back next week, or just watch the next video once this has all been put out there, and you're going to see skeletal remains of the gods. This is Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock here on Gaiam TV. Thank you for watching. Welcome to Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock. I'm your host. This is Gaiam TV. Send in your questions. When you become a Gaiam TV subscriber, not only do you gain access to over 5,000 unique streaming titles, all the biggest names in metaphysics and spirituality, it's really incredible how they've all been gathered together under one roof. You do have to pay for it, but it's a nominal charge per month. Really no different than getting Netflix or something. And once you're here, there's weekly shows, there's all kinds of benefits, including that if you send in your question and you get approved, we will put your question on the show. You'll be here on my screen asking me the question. Again, we have some groundwork to lay, and the groundwork is source field related and it's also extraterrestrial related. Because extraterrestrials do exist and they're not all evil, unlike what some fundamentalist Christians would like to believe. The Bible has both types of extraterrestrials in it. And the way we see this is by changing the translations. The word heaven shows up 700 times in the Bible. And the Old Testament Hebrew is the word shamayim. And the New Testament Greek, it shows up as the word angelos. Now, it actually translates in any other book from that time period as outer space, sky, cosmos, or universe. Very strange. Because doesn't that imply that what we think of as just some mystical, airy-fairy realm is actually outer space? That these people came from somewhere? And again, any other work besides the Bible from the same time period, any linguist is going to translate those words as meaning outer space or universe. The word God, Elohim in the Bible, shows up in the Hebrew. It's a plural, it's not a singular word, and it translates as mighty ones. So this appears 2,750 times in the Old Testament, and the Hebrew writers used it for both the good guys and the bad guys. I can't stress this enough. This is on the website BibleRealityCheck.com. Anybody who thinks that all ETs are bad, go back and look at your history. Translate what the Bible words really mean. Figure it out. Do the math. They're both the bad guys and the good guys. That's very important. Extraterrestrial humans coming here, visiting us, and helping us out. The word angel translates, well, first of all, the word angel in the Old Testament is malach, and in the New Testament it's angelos. That word translates as the one sent. Sent from where? From heaven. What's heaven? Oh, that's right, outer space. The angel is the one sent from outer space. It's an extraterrestrial human. It's a physical being. They are corporeal. You're going to see that in today's episode once again, that they've left behind skeletal remains. They're stunning. They've been DNA tested. We know they're not from Earth. I had to do this on Gaiam TV because you're not going to see this on the mainstream news. Just because you haven't seen it on TV doesn't mean it's not true. If you see it on Gaiam TV, you know it's true. Let's just put it that way. I'm just kidding with you. But the point is, I'm really glad that I am not being gagged or suppressed. I can tell you the truth. Finally, we get the truth out. So the angel is a messenger or an emissary, one of the mighty ones, one of the extraterrestrials who's been coming here all along from outer space, one sent from outer space. I'm just going to give you a couple of the Bible quotes that I did before. Isaiah 19:1, behold, Yahweh is riding on a swift cloud. Is that really just a cloud? What do you think they're talking about there? Well, look at this other quote from Isaiah 66:15. Now it's not a cloud, it's a chariot. It's a craft that you ride in, right? That's what a chariot is. And it's on fire. Like the whirlwind, it's a swirling fire. They're seeing something in the sky, up in the clouds, on fire. And in Psalm 68:17, they say there's thousands and thousands of chariots. It appears from material like the Law of One that the Battle of Armageddon started 1,000 years before Jesus arrived. It's an extraterrestrial battle being fought for control of the planet, and the bad guys got driven off. They were able to drive away the bad guys. The good angels drove them away, and then the good angels also backed off so that we could become modern and forget that they exist. And it was necessary for our evolution, at the point that we're at now, to lose track of these folks. Every culture worldwide has been visited by the gods. I'm going to very briefly go through some of that again. The Sumerians have gods with human faces. They're very tall. Look at her size compared to the lion. Right there, you can see her size compared to the lion. Then we see this guy on his throne, much taller than the people on the left. Akhenaten is shown in sculptures with a very large cranium and a hat that looks like the side of a modern UFO as we now see them. But he's a human, he's just got a really big skull. There's Nefertiti, she's got a really big skull. Every single time these people are drawn, you see this incredibly large skull. There's a sculpture of her from the German museum. Their daughter Meritaten, same thing. Huge skull. And you can't tell me that all these people that were carving these illustrations did this just for an artistic style. That's what the conventional archaeologists say as an explanation. I'm not buying it. That skull holds a brain much larger than ours. These people would all have a minimum of 300 IQ, and they've been sculpted in stone. They posed for these sculptures, these illustrations. Now, the Chaldean evil god Baal also is shown with a large skull. So these people from outer space could be good or bad, but each type has the enlarged skull. Baal is clearly portrayed with this very large head, just like we see in Egypt, and he's wearing this odd ring on his arm that allows him to have psychic capabilities, including thunderbolts that he can shoot and overpower people with and kill them. This is the Egyptian god Ramses, the son of Akhenaten. And of course Akhenaten and Nefertiti both had this unusual rib cage, an enlarged spine, similar to ours, but not the same body. If you went for a checkup at the doctor, they would think there was something really wrong with you. You had some genetic malformation, but they all had it. And that's not from inbreeding, that's the way they are. In this illustration, again, we see people on the left with ordinary shaped heads, people on the right with enlarged craniums, and they're wearing discs with wings on their heads, indicating they came in a flying disc. It's very obvious once you start doing the numbers between then and now. There's 30 islands off the southern coast of Greece called the Cyclades, and they carved these Cycladic figurines. Once again, take a look at them and look for yourself. They've got that enlarged cranium that shoots in the back. It's very obvious what we're seeing here. They played music, but look at the differences and the similarities between Baal, drawn sitting on his throne. Look at the positions of his arms very carefully, and then look at the position of the Cycladic figurine here. You see there's a similarity here. In this case, Baal is not drawn holding any type of harp, but the Cycladic guys certainly seem to be holding a stringed musical instrument that they strum for just ambiance, I guess. So the Cycladic figurines, there's no written records, we don't know anything about them, but they clearly seem to have been gods in those Cycladic islands. And again, they look very similar to the bad guys, Baal, but the good guys also have the same type of physiology. And again, Baal is also, he has underlings such as the god Moloch, and believe it or not, the Bohemian Grove, Alex Jones smuggled a hidden camera in there in his baseball cap, got in, and he filmed a ritual called the cremation of care, where we find out that the people in the Illuminati are still worshiping Moloch now. They have an eagle sculpture at the Bohemian Grove that they're doing mock sacrifice rituals in front of. Now, whether it's mock or not, we don't know. It might be real. They're following the same magic that goes back to ancient Roman times, because if you sacrificed to these gods, they would give you some of their power. And they will still do that because they feed on the energy. It's called loosh. And that's a scary discussion, but the point is we are not alone against these guys. You might have heard about Bohemian Grove. You might have heard about human sacrifice. You might have heard about Moloch, the owl-headed god. You may not have realized that the original Moloch was an extraterrestrial who did visit the Earth in physical form, and that there's been this war going on between them all this time. Now, in India, they had different types of human extraterrestrials. Blue-skinned gods, like you see here with Vishnu. In Mesoamerica, we have the white-skinned god Quetzalcoatl. He even looks like he's wearing some kind of helmet there, even though that's the head of a serpent. symbolizing the alignment with the center of the galaxy that just occurred at the end of the year 2012. Nobody else had white skin back then. White-skinned god Viracocha. He's got these very large, strange-looking eyes. And then we go north, we see the Kachina, same thing. Weird, wide face, large eyes, and a weird round mouth. We see a weird round mouth on the Japanese Dogu. Look at his hair. Tell me that doesn't look the same as the hats that the Egyptians are wearing, as the hat that Baal was wearing, the way he tied his hair up. There's so many connections here. These people came from the quote-unquote flying boats from the universe, and they gave the Japanese people all the things they needed for civilization. They gave them written language, spoken language, how to cultivate silk, how to make sushi, wasabi. I mean, hello, these guys are amazing. Thank you. I'm so grateful because I go to sushi every week. That's one of my habits, you know. I have to support my habit of eating. It's one of those things I can't quit yet. The Dogu over time, as I said, got distorted. They start to look more and more unusual until you see a head that's all eyes. Very peculiar here, but that's just the telephone game where they knew that they had big eyes, but then the eyes become the whole story. Dogu in Japan, Dogon in Africa, probably the same name, same people, carved from an eyewitness sighting as tall, spindly beings with these very large eyes on their head. Look at that. I mean, those eyes are so big, and they look similar to modern reports of certain types of extraterrestrials. That guy also might be wearing a helmet. Is that a beard, or is that the bottom of his helmet? We don't know, but it might actually be a helmet. And he also, again, has the funny round mouth. Down under, they were unlucky enough to have the visitations from the Greys, which were called the Wandjina. And these guys look just like modern versions of extraterrestrials that people claim to be seeing. But this is, you know, at least several hundred years old, if not thousands of years old, these paintings. And there's many of them, as you can see here. So these guys have been around for a long time. And again, once they go away, it all turns into the eyes, and the artistic depictions of them get stranger and stranger looking. But the original ones look the most like the Greys, and that's probably the one based on real sightings. So in Greece, we have human gods warring with each other. Mount Olympus could actually take off. It was a craft that they landed, and they were ruling over the people. These gods came in their ships, landed here. They were fighting the angels. They were fighting the good guys, and there were battles going on. Zeus had his thunderbolt in which lightning came out, and he could blow things up with it. They had advanced technology. And this is all stuff that we need to know again in our time. We've lost touch with the data. We've lost touch with these human extraterrestrials. We don't realize the big secret, which is that humans are all over the galaxy. But if you still don't believe me, let's go digging for bones. Let's dig up the skeletons, because if the gods are fighting, if you've got bad guys like Baal and Moloch and Ashtart fighting the good guys, the biblical angels, the seraphim, cherubim, principalities, dominions, virtues, powers, all those different hierarchies of human beings that were coming here. Some of the higher ones were probably energy beings because they could project a face at you regardless of where they were standing. You'd see their face dead on. But some of them definitely were flesh and blood. And they could die, and their skeletons have been dug up. Check this out. This is one of the skulls that was found in Peru. There's been hundreds and hundreds of these found. They're elongated, just like what we saw with Baal, just like what we saw with the Egyptians. This is exactly like what we would expect Akhenaten and Nefertiti's skulls to look like after they had died. And in fact, skulls like this were found in Egypt. It's just been kept very quiet. The Russians know about it. The American government knows about it. But the ones in Peru, there were so many of these gods in Peru that they couldn't hide all the archaeological ruins. Now, here's another one. This comes from Bolivia, the Museum of La Paz. And you can clearly see these skulls look very different than ours. They're very enlarged, and there's actually no bone ridges above the eye sockets here that would normally be used for the muscles to hook onto. Now check that out. Some of these could be the result of a head binding practice where they made the kids look like the gods, but look at the one in the middle. I mean, hello. You see this skull in the middle here? I mean, that's the brainiac. Look at his brain. Look at how big his head is. He is so much larger in his head size than everybody else around him. That's just amazing. Now this might be an example of head binding where they mush the kid's head using this barbaric procedure where they would actually take the soft skull of the baby and put it in wood. Then as you get older, it's sort of like wearing braces. You get to wear this as you run around. Why in the world would they do this to their kids? They wanted their kids to look like the gods. They were seeing the gods walking around on earth. Now that has changed. The war was won against the bad guys enough that they were driven off the surface, and then the good guys retreated. The angels retreated. Probably after the writing of the Quran, which is around 700 AD. In the Quran, you have jinn. You have angelic beings appearing on earth, but then after that they seem to fade out, but not before then. Discover magazine, this is very important. This was in, let me just make sure. Discover magazine in 2009 wrote this article, What Happened to the Hominids Who May Have Been Smarter Than Us? Very soberly takes into consideration these skulls that were found in an archaeological dig in South Africa in a small town called Boskop, 200 miles inland from the coast. They reconstructed the skull based on these bone fragments. This is a jaw fragment, and there's the bony plate on the top of the head. And by putting that together, we know what the size of the face would be, we know what the size of the teeth would be, but look at the skull. Look at how much bigger the skull is than a typical human skull on the right. Discover magazine is saying that these people would have a 300 IQ, and very importantly, they're given reverential religious burials. They are not treated like aliens. They are not treated like creatures. They're given a loving religious burial, flowers and treasure, all this stuff because they were highly revered. These people came to every culture. They gave us the teachings of how to be loving, how to be spiritual, and as your head gets larger, which probably is a fairly common thing in human evolution throughout the galaxy, some of these people become evil. And they also have that skull feature, and they've also been coming to the earth. And there's been this war going on this whole time, and we just don't realize what's happening. Well, Lloyd Pye, when he was at a conference in the mid-1990s, had someone come up to him and hand him this skull. I held this skull in my hands. It's called the Star Child skull. It's very, very strange. If you notice, there is no bump on the back of the head. It goes down on a very interesting slope angle that's totally different than our skulls. Now here's a pretty gross looking thing. This is a forensic reconstruction, whoa, of what this guy looks like as you put the jaw back on, which they found, the top of the jaw. You put the facial muscles back on, just like you would do if you found a skull. Where do you ever see a guy like that except maybe on the streets of Manhattan asking you for $5? That's probably about the only place that you'd find somebody like that. I'm joking, of course, but the point is, these guys are real. You can see that when you finish building him, he looks just like an extraterrestrial. And I think this guy looks disturbingly similar to Dr. Stephen Greer. What does it mean? I mean, is there a correlation here? I don't know. Just asking the question. It's only a question. Now, there's some very strange things about the Star Child skull. The bone is about half as thick as a normal human bone. Half as thick? Well, think about it. If a guy like that fell over and his bone is half the thickness of a normal human bone, his head's just going to break open. That bone is going to fracture. And then it gets worse because the bone weighs half as much as a normal human bone. I held this skull in my hands, and it's just paper thin. I mean, it's so light, you're just like, my gosh. Because what I had was a stereolithographic copy of the original, meaning it's perfectly duplicated with what it looks like, the weight, the texture, the color, everything is exactly the same. Now, even though it's half as thick and weighs half as much, it's twice as strong as normal human bone. And the only bone that we have in our body that's similar to that is the dental enamel on your teeth. That's pretty strange. The bone was carbon dated to be 900 years old. As of 2003, it was found in an abandoned mine tunnel 200 miles southwest of Chihuahua, Mexico, and it does not match any known deformities of human beings. Furthermore, we also see that it has a strange reddish residue in the bone that is not desiccated bone marrow, and you're going to see that in a minute here. We also see microscopic fibers in the bone that have never been seen in any other animal. And these fibers are extremely strong. You can't even cut through them with a bone saw without sometimes breaking the blade. When they tried to pull the DNA out of the skull, they clearly found maternal DNA, mitochondrial DNA from the mother, meaning that the mother was human. But the father's DNA, which is nuclear DNA, did not appear human at all. They couldn't get any human signature off of that DNA. Now here's the fibers that were found in the skull. On the left is a typical skull. On the right is the Star Child skull. Notice the streaking. This is the important part here. Look at these streaks. That's not normal. This is what it's supposed to look like over here, where you see little pock marks, but not these long streaks over here. This is the fibers that they found inside that would actually break the saw. That's what makes the bone so strong. It's some magic twist of fate and evolution that we don't have right now. If we did, we wouldn't break bones. You'd never need to give your kids braces because our bones would be so strong. And they'd be lighter too. We'd be able to be much lighter because even the skull, it weighs 15 pounds. Lloyd Pye handed me a regular human skull and it's heavy. I mean, you hold it in your hands, you're like, wow. Then you hold the Star Child skull, it's light as a feather. He also did a cast of inside the skull, which is what the brain looks like. And the brain inside the Star Child skull is totally different looking than our brain. So that's another amazing thing that's happened here. This is the result of the DNA test showing no father's DNA. And here's some other forensic reconstructions of what this guy would look like. I do not believe he had black eyes. Maybe something more like that. Now the glossy head makes him look kind of scary. I mean, you don't want to run into this guy in the middle of the night. It'd be kind of freaky. But again, he was murdered. The skeleton was found under a pile of rocks, and then the adult female skeleton was found next to that pile with her hand under the pile, holding the hand of the guy in there. And when they tested her DNA versus his DNA, she was not his mother. She was probably helping him, maybe a family member or something. But the point is, this guy was hunted down and killed. They are human, they bleed, they are susceptible to physical injuries, and they will die. Now, let's go back to that Boskop skull for a second, and realize that if you tilt this sphenoid bone a little bit, then you get the same skull as you have in Egypt. You're going to get more of a slope kind of like that, which is going to give you the same thing we saw in Egypt. And here's another example. This is a baby. It's a small baby skull and skeleton, mummified, found in Mesoamerica. And look at this. The eye sockets are way too big, and it's got molars on the sides of the jaw. Those are adult teeth in a baby. That can't happen with regular human evolution, but it did happen here. So again, these are hard, solid artifacts. We need disclosure. I want this to be on all of the television networks, not just Gaiam TV, because when you start putting the pieces together, I mean, come on. Skepticism just falls apart. Now, this actually came out recently in the news as well. They're calling it an alien skull. They're getting us closer and closer to the truth. This was from Daily Mail, and then this version of it was from Huffington Post. But the point is, they say, oh, well, it was a head binding practice. Yeah, but why would you put your kids through that? Why would you mush their skull and make them wear this horrible thing on their head for years to make them look like what? Like a monster? No. To make them look like the gods. That's the point. Now, I'm in a documentary with Dr. Stephen Greer called Sirius. And in Sirius, we are talking about disclosure. We've got lots of insiders and whistleblowers from the national security community. It's pretty amazing. And these whistleblowers are coming together for the first time. I really want this to get out there. And I hope that you'll see Sirius as well as watching my Gaiam TV program. Because here's a big thing. Dr. Greer starts announcing on his blog that he's got an extraterrestrial corpse. And this is the little guy. This is the picture of them when they were x-raying it. Here's what he looks like up close. He's only 6 inches tall. These are little people. But that's what came out on the x-ray. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, no kidding. The bones are different. Look at the neck. The neck bones here do not match a human physiology. They are too wide, and there's too many of them. It's too long. The jaw is totally different. There's no teeth. The skull is completely different. The eye sockets look different. The nasal area looks different. The shoulder is too far forward. The arms are too long. The spine is too long. There's extra ribs, and the hips are too narrow. And the head is huge. As you can see, the head is way too big compared to the rest of the body, compared to us. So here's this little guy being autopsied in the hospital on this film, and now they've turned him over. This is the back of his skull, and they've cut a hole in the head, and they're pulling a tissue sample out which has been DNA tested. And hopefully the results will be ready by the time this film comes out. I don't know what the test has shown, but I believe it's going to show non-human DNA, but human-like. These people came in these little craft that are like the shape of an egg. They landed here, and they were seen as the gods, which we're going to see in a minute. Now, that's the best that we had from the original trailer of the film. You can see he's got a bump on the top of his head here. Very important. But then we finally found the original photos. This was on a website from when it was first captured and frozen. You see the jaw is unusually large. I mean, that jaw doesn't look like our jaw. The mouth is huge, which would look a little scary, except remember, this guy's only like 6 or 7 inches tall. So if he bites you, who cares? It's no different than getting bitten by a squirrel. Okay? But his head is huge, and now we see the comparison between these two guys. You can clearly see it's the same being. There's the backside of the original photographs before that little spot on the skull was cut out. Now here we're seeing a tissue sample being cut out again. Now there's one of the original photographs showing him standing up as they hold him up because he was in the freezer. You can see he's still got some ice crystals on him. There's another view of him in somebody's hand. Look at how tiny he is. That's an adult hand. I mean, it's tremendous. So, now look at these shoulder blades. That's the next thing I want you to pay attention to here. We see the ancestor sculptures. Now look at this. We see the same type of spindly body, and look at the shoulder blades, just the same as what we saw before. They have that shriveled down appearance. The head, of course, has been stylized and looks different than the original. That's probably because the original left. But these little guys were 6 inches tall, and you'd wear them on your necklace in Easter Island because they were the gods. Now here's one of the Kava Kava sculptures. Look at the rib cage and tell me that doesn't look the same as what we're now genetically testing in Dr. Greer's documentary. Furthermore, the area between the ribs and the bottom of the hips is also the same. And this is interesting because if you see this down here, this is from the Vatican Museum of Propaganda. Interesting choice of words, a museum of propaganda, but it clearly says here that these were deified ancestral beings that were worshipped as gods and dispensed wisdom and technology, and these little statues were worn hanging around the necks of the guys doing these religious ceremonies. And now we've got x-rays of these little people. Isn't that something? Do you see where this is going? I'm telling you that we have been visited by extraterrestrials. I'm telling you that we have x-rayed their bodies. We have genetically tested them. We know they don't have human DNA. I've just showed you at least 3 different types of extraterrestrial species that we have hard artifacts of. The little people, we've got the star child, and we've got the elongated skulls that were called Boskop skulls that Discover magazine took seriously in a scientific article. When you come back next week or watch the next episode, I'm going to start going into where these people have been since the old days and what they want us to know right now. I'm David Wilcock. This is Wisdom Teachings here on Gaiam TV. Thank you. I'm David Wilcock. This is Wisdom Teachings. Welcome to Gaiam TV, where we have over 5,000 unique streaming video titles in super high definition quality. It's like the metaphysical Netflix. Everybody you can imagine who's ever made a name for themselves in this field, we have exclusive content right here. This week, our episode is going to take the extraterrestrial skull viewpoint and extend it into the dreaded Illuminati. We're going to find out that these people, historically speaking, going back to the 1400s, the top ones, not the ones that got elected necessarily, but the top Illuminati have skulls that look the same as what we're seeing from the Chaldean gods, from the Egyptian gods, from the Cycladic figurines in Greece. We're going to also see skulls from Siberia that were dug up in Siberia that look this way. We're going to see more of them from Mesoamerica. We're going to see, again, images from South Africa. These are a worldwide phenomenon. Extraterrestrials are a reality. Extraterrestrial humans are a reality. I want to bring in now some of the information that we started with in some of the earlier episodes describing DNA as a quantum property of the universe, that DNA actually emerges from the background energy of space and time itself. This was discovered by a Nobel laureate scientist, Dr. Luc Montagnier, in 2011. Now, this guy did win a Nobel Prize for biology, so he knows what he's talking about. And in this experiment, he took DNA and put it in this little tube here, as you can see, and then put it around a coil of electrical activity, 7 hertz, as you can see here from the generator. And then he electrifies it with these other tubes next to him, and those tubes only have plain water in it. But what happens is that the water that's got the DNA in it in one side completely changes over the water in the other side. So we have 2 hermetically sealed tubes of water. One tube has trace amounts of DNA in it. The other tube obviously does not. You electrify both of them with a 7 hertz field, which is about the same as the Schumann resonance, the basic heartbeat of the Earth. And then the water molecules in the second tube alchemically rearrange. They literally turn into DNA. Now, there's only hydrogen and oxygen in water, so this implies that quantum physics can actually transmute elements, and it's happening automatically. The idea here is that DNA, all the information that makes DNA, which is extremely complicated, exists in the energy of space and time itself. All you have to do is zap it with this electrostatic current, and DNA emerges as a quantum field effect that did not require other DNA to be there. Now, if it can be done in the laboratory by a Nobel Prize winning scientist, obviously the complexity of human DNA does not indicate that this is impossible. Even though DNA is so complicated, all the DNA on Earth is very, very similar. There's only slight alterations between dolphin, but even vegetable DNA and human DNA is actually very similar. So human DNA can exist as a quantum property in the background of space itself, and life forms, including human beings, arrange spontaneously. Now, this is a model that comes out of the Law of One series, but the proof is really in how this DNA science applies to what we see in our own historical records. As I've been saying, in the book of Isaiah in the Bible, there's extensive references to extraterrestrial contact. Yahweh is portrayed as riding in on a swift cloud, which implies that he's up there in the sky. And then in another passage from the same book, 66:15, it says that he is on a fiery chariot that looks like a whirlwind. And in this next quote, which is Psalm 68:17, we clearly see the chariots of the mighty ones, i.e. the Elohim, the emissaries, those who are sent from heaven, which of course translates as outer space from any other book of that time period besides the Bible. The mighty ones come in chariots in thousands and thousands, and Yahweh is among them. There was widespread ET coming and going back on the earth in those days, and we see every culture giving reference to these characters. Now, I'm only going to review a few of the ones that we saw before and get into some new stuff here. The Sumerians, human-looking gods, very tall. Inanna here, much larger than the lion that she's dominating and putting her foot on with telepathic control over its mind. Otherwise, it would attack her and tear her up, but it's not. Then we see again this guy on his throne, much larger than the people to the left of him. We see Egyptian gods like Akhenaten wearing a hat that clearly looks like the side of a modern UFO. And of course, Nefertiti, his wife, also is drawn with a very enlarged skull. Every illustration of her we see, all of these ancient illustrations, they're wearing, in many cases, this circle on their head with wings coming off of it, which clearly seems to indicate that they came in on a flying disc, just like the records say. Nefertiti is illustrated with this very large skull, and their daughter Meritaten, there's a granite bust of her where you see the head very large. And this is another one from the German Berlin National Museum. Here's another one of Meritaten, as I've been saying. Now this is Baal. This is the Chaldean god who was actually the closest you get in the Bible to the devil. Baal also is Baal-zebub, the lord of the flying insect that stings. They were sacrificing children in, for example, the nation of Carthage to Baal and to his underling Moloch. And what we're now noticing is that eyewitness sightings of Baal actually show him with this really, really large head. I mean, look at the size of that. And he's got this ring on his arm, which is a technology that he was using to enable him to have psychic powers, such as shooting thunderbolts, which made the people believe he was a god and that he had supernatural powers and that they had to fear him. Now, this could just be some ordinary schmo from outer space, a human, who happens to have an advanced toy that he's playing with. But how do the people know the difference between a technology and him actually having these abilities naturally? We might yet be able to develop this technology today. Here he is with his minions like Moloch, which is, just as you can see, another one of these humans wearing some kind of headdress, some kind of mask, which apparently in the Illuminati they still do. Now here's the thing. Baal was actually reproducing with people on Earth, and his children are the Illuminati. That's one of the things we're going to find out in today's episode. It's scary, but I want to take you through this so that you can learn the truth for the first time. Because these gods are still out there, and they're still working with our government. They also visited the Cyclades, these 30 islands south of Greece, and formed the Cycladic figurines, as you see here, which takes a little bit of artistic license, but basically it's the same people with these elongated skulls. The Hindus had a different type of ET contact. We see the blue-skinned humans like Vishnu on their flying lotuses. And the Maya had Quetzalcoatl, a white-skinned god, clearly looking like he's illustrated with some kind of helmet on in this illustration. They'd never seen white people before. Then the Japanese have the Dogu. Notice the hat. Notice that his hair is illustrated very similarly to what we saw on Baal's head. That same little knot of hair up here. And his face is also unusual. He's got a very unusual spacesuit on. And then in Africa we have the Dogon, which also is the same kind of name. We have very large eyes on the head, and it looks like he might even be wearing a helmet there. But his eyes are very, very unnaturally large compared to ours, and he looks similar to modern reports of extraterrestrials that we see today. The Australians again had the Wandjina, which look very similar to modern accounts of greys. We also see skeletal remains. So if you haven't believed what I'm telling you, I'm going to show you even more of the new pictures that you haven't seen before in these other episodes. Again, these are the ones that we see in Peru. This is very commonly seen. It's not unusual. There are many, many of these skulls. And of course, the natives did bind their heads to try to look like these people. But some of the skulls, like this one in the middle in this photograph, are so much larger than a normal human. How can you possibly tell me that that is some kind of genetic abnormality? There's no genetic precedent for anything like that in our ordinary fossil record. And look at this guy over here on the left. I mean, hello, this is so much, a normal human skull should stop right about there. Whoop, look at all the extra that he's got. It's incredible. And we see close-ups of this. You can see from the side. I mean, my God, it's so large. How? That's what she said, right? How? How could this be done? How could this even happen? So, all right. I got a little racy. I'm sorry about that. GuyMTV, we're not supposed to go too far over the line, but you look at these skulls and it's outrageous. How did that happen? This is not a normal terrestrial human. Now, this is from Brian Forster, and this is a new one that was found recently. It's a mummy, and you can actually see the hair still on top of the head, but this skull is so much larger than it should be. I mean, it should stop about there, right? But it goes way beyond. So these people were all over the place. Their skeletons were dug up in South Africa, and that's what formed the Boskop skulls. In 1913, they found multiple skulls like this, and this is a forensic reproduction of what it looks like compared to a regular human skull. The brain is much larger. Discover magazine estimated that the least intelligent of these people would have a 300 IQ. Then we see this baby, which has actually a very enlarged skull. It has super large eye sockets, and it has molars that are adult in a baby-sized body. That's totally abnormal for anything that we have. These skulls were featured recently on Huffington Post, as well as on Daily Mail. And what you didn't see before, where did that come from? This little guy here, look at the size. There's the bump. Now, that's one type of human that has that bump on the top of their head. Others don't. That is from Siberia. They dug those skulls up in Siberia. And I also want to point out that Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union during World War II, found out about the Roswell crash and realized that it was not just a weather balloon. And he looked back in the records of the Russian Empire to see if there was any comparable fossil that they found. And sure enough, somebody had dug up a rocket back in the 1800s, and it's called the Siberian Roswell. Look it up. They went back there, and the guy had buried the rocket after he dug it up because they didn't know how to get it out of the ground safely. They went back, they dug up this very metallic rocket, very smooth, sharp rocket. It had Sanskrit writing on it, and they found a chamber underneath with a treasure chest in it, and the treasure chest had documents that include illustrations of space stations and UFOs, and the Russians were able to reverse engineer that rocket and develop technology from it, which are these flying spheres like UFOs called cosmospheres. And if you go back and look at the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, there is a cosmosphere near the Challenger as it's coming down because the Russians shot that ship down. That was done with scalar electromagnetics, and you can see as you watch that Challenger footage that there's this weird cloud around the space shuttle, and it starts flickering and doing all this funny light stuff, and then boom! There go the fuel tanks. That was not an accident. That was a deliberate shoot down as part of this Cold War and the Soviet Union fighting against the U.S. before they were defeated in 1991 with the fall of the Iron Curtain. But in the same area where they found the Siberian Roswell, we see these skulls. Now, the men who dug these skulls up were so freaked out by what they saw that they cried. Many men, when these skulls started to be dug up, actually quit their jobs and left. The area that this was found in is Omsk, O-M-S-K, and there are videos you can watch online where they're actually showing you these skulls and rotating them in their hands. Now, this is actually something that aired on television. This is an X-ray of King Tut's skull. Now, you'll notice that the back of the skull is too long. What the heck is going on here? A regular human skull should stop right about there. There's all this extra down here that shouldn't be there. And you can actually see it in the forensic reconstruction. Look over here. Look at the size that you see on the back. This is zooming right in on the mummy that they found buried in King Tut's tomb. So it's all out there in the open. Here's another Egyptian mummy, which still contains a little bit of the physiology of the way that these quote-unquote gods had been. Now, yes, this is censored, and whoever came up with this didn't spell the word censor right, so I apologize for that. But you're not going to get to see any boob today. The interesting thing here, though, is the baby. Are you looking at the baby's head? Yes, of course. That is a baby that has retained Boskop features. That is not the result of head binding. Some of the people in Africa still have the extraterrestrial DNA to a large degree, and their skulls still reflect that shape. Now, here's another picture of a Boskop skull baby. Look at how far back the head goes. That's a modern human example of what we're talking about. Now, in this case, this is an example of somebody who probably doesn't have the Boskop features, but did get his head bound when he was a kid in order to make him look like the gods. Now, that brings us to a very controversial subject, the Illuminati. The Illuminati, from the highest levels, this is what I've been told by insiders, they are the descendants of these people, like the Chaldean evil god Baal. Okay? He was real. You saw the statues. We've dug up the skulls. Well, check this out. Prince Leonello and Princess d'Este, who are Italian, i.e. Roman Empire, bloodline, Illuminati bloodline, as I'm going to show you in a minute, their genetic lineage traces back to all kinds of European royalty. They're all descendants of these people. These are a common denominator of most of the entire European royal bloodlines. But what you don't know is this. Check out their heads. Look up close now. Look at how much farther back his head goes here. It should stop about there, but it doesn't. It goes all the way back, and her head, the same thing. Now, it appears they have a little bit of hair, but it's also very strange because it looks almost like he's got a pull-on wig, doesn't it? Look at how that straight line is, like it's a not very good wig, and he's just pulling it on. Maybe his whole head is bald here. But every illustration of these people is suspiciously similar to what we see from Egypt. And the Huns are supposed to be the bloodline descendants of the Illuminati. That's the original bloodline of the Khazars. Now, if you've done a lot of Illuminati research, you know that the Khazars were not Jewish. They only picked that religion in order to have a way to compete with the Christians. And the conquerors, the Huns, led by Genghis Khan, terrified people who they invaded because they had these very unusual looking skulls. That's a documented historical fact, and the Illuminati are the descendants of these Huns, the Khazars, after they made their way into the Soviet Union, and then from the Soviet Union they continued pushing over into Europe, such as the d'Este bloodline that we saw before. Every coin that you see of the d'Este bloodline, look at the size of his skull in the back here. Every time that you see it anywhere, that's what it looks like. Now, I don't know what the heck the deal is with the whole blindfolded flying cat on a flying carpet. I mean, that's some kind of strange Illuminati symbol that we probably will never understand. But the point is, there again, look at his head. Look at how large the skull is. Here's another one where you see his skull is very enlarged. And there's another example of it. And here's another example. So every time they coined any money from these guys, that's what it looked like. Now, I just want to point out here that this is a list of descendants from the house of d'Este. And if you might not be able to read it on the screen, but it says, all British monarchs since George I from the United Kingdom are descended from the house of Este. That's these people. The Jacobite pretenders were descended from the house of Este. The British consorts are the descendants from the house of Este. This includes Queen Mary Beatrice, the wife of James II of Scotland, Queen Caroline, the wife of George IV of the United Kingdom, Queen Alexandra, Queen Mary, Philip, the husband of the reigning Queen Elizabeth. You ever look at Prince Philip and be like, man, that dude's kind of scary. He is a direct bloodline descendant of the house of Este. The people with these skulls popping out in the back. Now, they kept a low profile, and I've heard from the Illuminati that the updo that you still see women wear a lot of times at weddings and stuff, where they tie their hair up in the back, That was originally done so the Illuminati could camouflage their large skulls so people wouldn't ask strange questions. So yes, there is a bloodline. That's why they have royal right of kings succession lines. This is not anything new. This has been going on for a long time. If we go back to Avebury, that stone site that's similar to Stonehenge, we see this little guy buried at the site. And of course, what we find out is that an Illuminati group wanted to rebury this, but then the public decided, no, we need to have this guy still there. But if you look at the skull, there's something strange there. That skull's a little bit too big. It's not quite a Boskop skull, but it's unusual. So we talked before about the Star Child skull. Lloyd Pye, of course, found this skull. Somebody gave it to him at a conference. It's half as light as normal human bone, half as thick, but at least twice as hard, has all kinds of unusual features, and it does not have paternal DNA. It's very different. We also described a fully intact extraterrestrial corpse that's going to be featured in the upcoming documentary Sirius. Now these folks, of course, are not going to be breeding with us anytime soon because they're very, very small. Only 6 inches tall. Here he is on the little pillow for the x-ray that they did. You can see him up close there, but check out the x-ray. Now, their head is so much larger than a regular human skull. Look at the size of the cranium compared to the size of the shoulders and the neck. The neck is too long. The vertebrae are too far apart. The arms are too long. There's all sorts, as I said before, the teeth are missing. The jaw is too long. There's all sorts of physiological differences here. And in the Sirius film, they autopsy this little being. And that film is debuting, I believe, on April 24th. So anytime after that, it will be available. And this show will be airing after that. So you can go and see Sirius. Just Google it up and you'll find it. So they did also take a genetic sample out of the back of the head. They cut the back of the head out and pulled out this genetic sample. And the results of that test will be in the documentary. We did find the original photos, as I said before. This is what he looked like before he got desiccated after probably 10 years of being in a freezer. You can see the mouth a little better. Now, these are good people. These are not scary creatures. Our director had a nightmare about these beings last night when we did the other shoot and they were attacking him and biting him. I really don't think that's what it is. I don't think we need to be afraid of them. They're not like piranhas that are going to come and eat you. But they were actually revered in ancient times as gods. They came to the people of Easter Island and they were called the Kava Kava Moai ancestors. Now, when we look at these little sculptures, we see, my gosh, the whole dried out body after they died. Their skin doesn't look like this when they're alive, but look at these shoulder blades and look at the whole way that the body is kind of crunched in and the weird posture and the elongated area here. It's exactly the same. Everything about this. Now, these were the givers of wisdom, dispensers of technology, and originally the body was worn, this little 6-inch body was worn on a necklace by the tribal elders when they had religious ceremonies, because these people were giving them wisdom, technology, information. So here's another Kava Kava sculpture. You can see they changed the head. The face is a little bit more anthropomorphic than what the original looked like. That's probably because they lost track of it. But as you can see here from the Vatican Museum of Propaganda, that we have them being illustrated as dispensers of wisdom and technology. They were clearly not evil. They were not trying to hurt anybody. They were here to do something nice. Now, in modern times, the same exact type of being was found in Russia, and here it is. This is another dried out corpse. In this case, a schizophrenic woman found this little being in front of her house, kept it in the house, fed it milk and candy, and ultimately, as it was dying off, they brought it to the hospital, and the hospital saw it as a baby because it looked somewhat human-like, and it had eyes, and it was sentient, and so they were trying to help this little guy survive. Now, you can see by the hand here that he's not very large. This is maybe about 10, 12 inches long at the most. But look at this, look at the little bump on the head, the skull plates you can clearly see here. And in the front, we have some very unusual skull fissures that we don't have. It's sort of like a trident shape that comes together here. And of course, there's a lot more to this story. When it was alive, it had a vertical slit pupil and it had this funny bulbous tongue. and it was trying to eat and drink, and they'd see the little bulbous tongue licking. So this is an actual drawing of what it looked like when it was alive. So you can see there was more flesh. They dry out when they die, so that's where the skeletal appearance comes from. But originally they don't look like that. But you can see it has a bump on the head. They did bring this little guy to the hospital. The hospital tried to keep him alive. But then when the Japanese wanted to buy the actual corpse, they were going to pay $250,000 for it. It mysteriously disappeared. However, the other one that was found in Chile was not lost. And now we have the X-ray, the forensic diagrams that have been taken of this. But look at the head of the one that was in Russia. Notice how the bone comes to a point up here, and see the same thing on the one from Chile. And they both allegedly came out of egg-shaped UFOs. Now, in Chile, more recently, an even smaller extraterrestrial body was found. This is going to trip you out if you haven't seen this on my website already. Look at how tiny that little guy is. Now, if you were scared of the other one that's going to bite you, this one's even less scary, because look at how tiny this little guy is. Only like 3 inches tall. But when they look at him up close, he's got features that are clearly similar to other types of extraterrestrials that we've seen. Now, why would they go to the trouble of making this little shriveled up body like this? But let's get a close-up on that face. The face is a little bit scary, okay? I'll be the first to admit that. You can clearly see what look like antennae here on the eyes. The eye looks really menacing, and it kind of has a bird-like face. But then again, it just kind of looks like it could be any bird that you've seen before. So these people have returned. The gods are back. And the gods have been visiting us for quite some time. When we go back into history, the Roswell crash is not the only historic UFO crash. There was a crash in Aurora in 1897. And then 10 years later, we had the Fatima mass sightings, an amazing sequence of events that occurred here in Portugal, where these 3 children started to receive visions. And what the visions were doing really is trying to stop Portugal from entering into the World War I, which was the war to end all wars. Really horrible. The war began on July 28, 1914. It ended on November 11, 1918. That's 11/11, Armistice Day. And the Treaty of Versailles was then signed on June 28, 1919. 42 million Allied soldiers died in this war. It was the first mechanized war. Airplanes, machine guns, all kinds of things, tanks. Then we also see 22 million others killed, wounded, or missing. It's unbelievable. And then that's only one side. The central side had 25 million casualties and another 16.5 million killed, wounded, or missing. You're looking at a total of over 100 million casualties. That's unbelievably outrageous. The ETs did not want this to happen. There were angelic appearances where these children saw an extraterrestrial type of being. There was a strong gust of wind that made them look up, and they saw a fair white cloud in human form take shape and come toward them, looking like a snow statue that the sun had made to be transparent as crystal. This apparition said, "Fear not, I am the angel of peace," and urged them to pray for world peace. Portugal had just entered into the war on the side of the Allies in 1916. This began the apparitions of what they called the Virgin Mary, but I want to make it very clear that the being itself never said it was the Virgin Mary. And there's some very fascinating information that we're going to get into in next week's episode about these Virgin Mary apparitions. I'm trying to give you an overview here to show you past, present, and future, because the ultimate Virgin Mary apparition sighting involved a disk of dull silver in the sky. You're going to see that next week. 90,000 people saw it, and after it was over, even though it had been pouring rain and everybody was soaked to the skin, all 90,000 people were completely dry. And they saw a disk of dull silver in the sky. In the era of YouTube and camera phones, it would be disclosure. It would be over. So next week, we're going to discuss the Virgin Mary apparitions, the extraterrestrial beings that are out there in the universe looking out for our best interests. They don't want us to fight with each other. So your wisdom teaching for the week is how these extraterrestrials have existed all throughout time. I'm David Wilcock, and you're watching us here on Gaiam TV. All right, you are back with me here on Gaiam TV, Wisdom Teachings with me, David Wilcock. And this week, this episode, we're going to be branching out from our discussion of historic extraterrestrials and getting into modern day contacts. If you're a Gaiam TV subscriber, you can send in your questions and you'll be here on my screen in the show. If we pick your question, we'll ask you to send us a video of yourself asking the question, and as long as it's less than 60 seconds and the video quality is pretty good, we'll use it. And we'll put it on the show, because this is your show. We're co-creating this. But all of what I'm doing is building up to the wisdom teachings, which ultimately revolve around the idea that extraterrestrial humans have been out all over the world. They visited every culture. They gave us written language, animal husbandry, civilization. And the reason why we know that they're out there is actually DNA science. The human genome is a product of quantum physics. It's written into the background of space and time itself. As I said last week, Dr. Luc Montagnier took an ordinary drop of water that had pieces of DNA in it and electrified it with other vials of water that were only pure water. Now, they're hermetically sealed, but DNA formed after 18 hours in each of these tubes of water. So that experiment is very strange. We actually had skeptics saying that it was a dangerous idea to believe that a Nobel Prize-winning scientist would have credibility because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But he replicated this, and he did it over and over again. It's an intrinsic fact that DNA can arise out of water. The universe is alive. The universe is a living organism, and humans are what our galaxy is built to make. They're going to appear every time a planet has liquid water. They're not always going to be the same. They have some differences. And I showed you all these different culture examples around the world. You look at Akhenaten, and he's got a hat that clearly looks like the side of a UFO. And look at the size of his skull. I mean, the face is small enough, but then the head is enormous. And we see Nefertiti has the same kind of skull. We see lots of examples of Egyptian artwork where they're drawn with these huge skulls, or sculpted in the case of Nefertiti here, or their daughter Meritaten here, in granite, a very hard stone to work. Here's another example. And here's another example where she's wearing a hairpiece on one side of her head, but the back is bald. The equivalent of the devil in the Bible is Baal. He becomes El, which becomes hell. And all of these biblical satanic beings actually correspond to beings with these elongated skulls. This is Moloch, who's only the disciple of Baal, and they were sacrificing people to Moloch back in the Carthaginian and Roman Empire times, and we're still seeing that happening today. In the Black Ops community, in certain aspects of it, the Illuminati, certain divisions of the Cabal or the Illuminati are still sacrificing to Moloch, and in fact people of Bohemian Grove were filmed doing this ritual called cremation of care in front of a gigantic stone effigy of Moloch in the shape of an owl, because the owl head was one of the masks that this extraterrestrial being would wear. But they were not really gods, they were just visitors from other planets that had exotic technology. We also see the Cycladic figurines, as I said before, with their elongated skulls. These are stylized. That's not exactly what they look like, but you can clearly see the elongated skull here in these figurines. The Hindus have blue-skinned humans on flying lotuses. The Maya have white-skinned gods. The Japanese had gods that look very unusual compared to us. Even in Africa, they have the Dogon. Look at the size of the eyes on the head. Tell me that doesn't look like an extraterrestrial human. It's not like a typical human. There's something different going on here. The Australians have the Wandjina, which look like the Greys from their cave paintings. And we found skeletal remains of extraterrestrial humans from all over the world. These happen to come from Peru. You can go to the Museum of La Paz in Bolivia and see this. Now, some of these skulls, yeah, okay, that looks fairly normal, but this in the middle here, look at the size of the skull. It's incredible. And look at this guy over here. I mean, the length of that skull should stop about there, right? But there's all this extra. So that's very, very unusual, and it's right out there in the open. They can't conceal this completely because these were found by archaeological expeditions, and the cabal doesn't have enough of a presence in Bolivia to have stopped this from showing up in the museum. This is a recent one that was found in an archaeological dig and given to Brian Forster. It is essentially contraband. There's some international laws that had to be tweaked in order for us to even be able to see this. But again, Discover magazine had the Boskop skulls. These were discovered in South Africa in 1913, 200 miles inland from the coast. And these bone fragments were enough, with the combination of the top of the skull and the jaw, we know that the face is different than a typical human skull, leading to a brain capacity twice as large as our own. These were found in an area of Siberia called Omsk, and one of the types of ET skulls has that bump on the top of the head here, just like we saw in Peru. The workers who found these skulls, as I said, cried and actually quit their jobs because they were so scared of what they were seeing. They didn't know what to make out of this. If you actually look at the x-rays of King Tut's tomb, we see that his skull is extremely large. And we also see in Africa modern-day humans who have skulls like the gods, like this baby right here, as you can see. And of course the boob is censored, and whoever did this misspelled the word censor, which I think is kind of funny. But the point is, you can even see the bun-like bump here is the same. There's too much skull for that to be something that was done by head binding. That's the result of extraterrestrial genetics that have been interbred with our own. And I also discussed Prince Leonello and Princess Dieste of the Illuminati, where they have the same skulls. And they are the common denominator bloodline of all the European royalty, including Prince Philip, who is the husband of the current reigning Queen Elizabeth in Britain. Isn't that something? And it looks like he's wearing a wig, like he's pulled this thing on over his bald head, because they might not even have hair. And a lot of these people keep a low profile. If you'd see them in public, they'd probably wear a hat or they wear their hair up. But that's all designed to help conceal their identity, because they have a lot more extraterrestrial DNA than we do. And I also probably shouldn't say this on the air, but I do know from my insiders that the Jesuits have a lot more extraterrestrial DNA than typical humans do. That's just something I'm going to put out there. But Lloyd Pye had this skull given to him at a conference. It's been genetically tested. It is not human father DNA. It's much too large on the sides. There's all kinds of oddities about it. And we had this little guy who's going to show up in the Sirius documentary, 6 inches tall. And they were actually found, this one was found in Chile, but then in ancient Easter Island, way out there in the Pacific Ocean, they visited them and were carved into these Kava Kava Moai ancestors, which looks identical to what we see in Chile in modern times in the documentary, except that they anthropomorphized the facial features a little bit, as you see here. This is from the Vatican Museum, and it shows the physiological features, very similar, in fact almost identical to what we see in this. This is the X-ray diagram of the one from Chile. And we see a very similar extraterrestrial species in Russia. This little guy died with his arms crossed. He was alive when they found him, found by a schizophrenic woman, brought to the hospital. They thought it was a baby, and they wanted to feed the baby, keep the baby alive. This is what the eyes looked like. It had a vertically slit pupil and a weird bulbous tongue. And it didn't have that shriveled up skeletal appearance. That's only once they dry out after they've died. They tried to keep the baby alive, but it did die, and then it was mysteriously taken away. But you see that the skull grows very differently. There's 3 major bony plates, actually 4, because there's one here, then one on the side, one on this side. But one bone comes up taller than the other, and it's exactly the same physiological feature that we see in Chile. Why is that like that? because this is real. This is not a hoax. You got to break down the conditioning that makes you laugh at extraterrestrial life and realize that there's something real going on here. We also saw in recent times a boy found this tiny, tiny little ET in Chile. He found it in the grass out in front of the place he was staying. He wrapped it up in newspaper, brought it home, and then saw that he had mortally injured it. It was bleeding to death, and he felt really bad about that. But he didn't tell anybody, and it died after 9 or 10 days. And then he showed it to his parents when it was dead, and they brought it in and got it looked at. Look at how tiny this little thing is. That shows you that humans come in all shapes and sizes, and they have been visiting us for a long time, and they still do. Now, why South America? Well, there's a lot of room to move around out there where they won't be seen. But you can see they have antennae similar to a bird, and the eye is very bird-like, as is the jaw, so these may be the bird tribes. But this is all real stuff. We're not talking about a hoax here. Why would they go to that trouble? In modern times now, we're seeing these gods returning to the earth and bringing with them the wisdom of what they have been trying to help us with all along. They've never really left. In biblical times, they came and went, but then they kind of pulled back so that they weren't obvious. And now we are in the times that they're starting to return. There was a crash in Aurora, Texas in 1897 seen by this old woman, and there was a wreckage that came out of that crash that was classified by the United States government. I did hear from insiders that there was a airplane looking, a very sleek, almost like the SR-71 Blackbird type airplane that they dug up. It was gold, and they dug it up in the late 1800s. I heard this from somebody who privately wrote me and met a very senior member of Majestic, and before this man died, he wanted the truth to be known, that they actually unearthed the UFO in the late 1800s, put it away in the earlier equivalent of Area 51, hid it away. 10 years after that first big UFO crash, we had Fatima. Fatima is considered a Catholic miracle, yes, but there's a lot more to it than you might have realized. These children in this town in Portugal, Fatima, these 3 children started to get visitations by what appears to be an extraterrestrial human that can project itself in an energetic form. It appeared at the time that Portugal was about to enter into World War I. A horrible war that began on July 28, 1914, ended on Armistice Day, 11/11/1918, and the Treaty of Versailles was signed the following year. 42.9 million Allied soldiers died. 22.5 million were killed. This is an insane number. 25.2 million men on the Central Powers side died, and an additional 16.5 million were killed, wounded, or missing. That's a body count that probably totals over 100 million human beings. This is slaughter on an unbelievable scale. I just saw this guy from New Zealand at the airport. The entire population of New Zealand, everybody in New Zealand is 4 million people. So think about the number of people that died in World War I in just a few years. It's unbelievable. We've never seen anything like it. Now, the ETs did not want World War I to happen, and the way that they tried to pull Portugal out and create a mass awakening to stop us from having war was by this visitation. A strong gust of wind came, and these children saw a white cloud in human form taking shape and coming towards them. It looked like a snow statue or a transparent image of a human being. It was sort of ghost-like. And then the apparition said to them, "Fear not, I am the angel of peace." And it urged them to pray for peace, not just for themselves, but for their entire country and for the world. And they wanted to create an incident that would stop Portugal from supporting World War I, because just before this visitation started, Portugal had entered this unbelievably deadly war. This was a classic example, as we now know through retrospective analysis of insider testimony. World War I was fake. This was an Illuminati-created war to create mass disaster and to create an opportunity for them to take everybody's money to confiscate gold from all over the world. And so the ETs were intervening in this battle with the Illuminati, who are still being run by negative extraterrestrial humans like Baal and Moloch, who were real people, not just some figment of your imagination, but real beings, and we saw their statues. So the Virgin Mary apparitions start showing up. The first one was on May 13th, 1917. Pretty amazing. There was a cloudless sky, and then they see these big flashes of light. The children were very surprised, and then they saw a beautiful lady who seemed to be standing on the branches of an oak tree. This lady asked them to come there every month on the 13th for the following 6 months, and then they came back a month later. Sure enough, June 13th, 1917, they saw the lightning flash, some kind of bright flash of light, and the lady told the children a secret. This is the infamous secret of Fatima, which was documented and suppressed. Some of the teachings came out, some of them were suppressed, and we're going to get to that later. July 1917, July 13th, by this point people are getting interested. So there was a crowd of up to 5,000 people that appeared, and the apparition reaffirmed this great secret to the children, which again, the Vatican has still classified the information. And I'm going to tell you in later episodes what I think the secret of Fatima that was hidden really is. She says, continue to come on the 13th of each month. In October, I will tell you who I am. That's very, very important. Where I went, and I shall work a great miracle for all to see. So here's the thing. Who is she, and where did she go? And of course, we're going to learn that she is an extraterrestrial, and she goes in outer space. Just like in earlier episodes, I showed you that if you really understand the Bible, the angels in the Bible are extraterrestrial humans. And she will work a great miracle. You're going to see what that miracle is in just a minute here. Now we get to August 13th, 1917. Things are starting to get exciting at this point. Rebellion is going crazy. There's all kinds of upheavals in Russia, France, Germany, Italy. They're trying to overthrow their governments because they don't want war. They're trying to create peace. So things are really getting chaotic. The Portuguese government now saw this Fatima sighting as a threat to their political power, because people were saying, look, the Virgin Mary, which she never identified herself that way, remember that. That's only what people said. The Virgin Mary does not want Portugal to be in war. They started to get this uprising from the people because of this extraterrestrial intervention. The Portuguese government arrested the children and put them in jail. And the apparition did not show up, which leads to this huge crowd of people, 18,000 people that showed up at that point. And they were upset because the children had been arrested. That made them even more angry at the government. It's sort of like if the haters come after you and you're a celebrity, like you see with some of these people, don't defend yourself. Don't try to say, oh, please don't hate me, because then they're going to go crazy. So if the government tries to arrest the children, you think that's going to stop the crowds? Heck no. That makes everybody go even more wild. So then, August 13th, the same day, the crowd gets restless, and then they hear a loud explosion coming from the oak tree where it had all first started. The witnesses again saw the flash of light that usually precedes the appearance of the apparition, and the sun actually dimmed out, and the air filled with magnificent colors. So all those people did not get disappointed. Now, what dimmed out the sun? You're going to see later on that it was a disc of dull silver. Eyewitness reports said they saw a metallic disc. But this is 30 years before the term flying saucer had ever been coined. Nobody knew what they were looking at. They just called it the sun. So as we go on here, this fine white cloud comes down and rests on the tree once again. The branches actually sag under the weight of the cloud, showing that it's clearly not a hallucination. There was something physically there that could push on the tree. It remained there for 10 minutes. This is after they've seen these brilliant, beautiful colors in the sky. And then this apparition finally rises up and disappears on August 13th, 1917. Now, 6 days later, on August 19th, the children have been set free. They're tending their flock because they were shepherds. And the apparition tells them to persevere and once again makes the promise, I'll come back on October 13th. It's going to be the big grand finale. Wait till you see what happens then. We're going to really work a miracle for you. It's getting exciting. So September 13th, 1917. Now the momentum is really building. 30,000 people gathered to see the the show. Pretty incredible. In the era of YouTube, it would be all over. Everybody would have their own camera. They'd all be filming this. The sun completely went dark. It looked like nighttime until they literally could see the stars in the night sky becoming visible. Imagine what that would feel like if you were one of those 30,000 people in this audience. You know to come. You know it's like the grand metaphysical concert. And then, bam, it gets so dark that in the daytime you actually can see the stars in the sky. The air then took on a golden color, and a globe of light was seen gliding through space from the east to the west. This is obviously a UFO sighting. It's very clear this is able to be done with technology. A thin mist forms around the tree, and white flowers begin falling from the sky, but here's the key. They disappeared as they were about to hit the ground. Now, what do you think that is? I don't think those are literally flowers. It sounds to me like some very advanced holographic projection. These flowers coming down, they look visible, but then when they're about to hit the ground, boom. Now, if you could park your UFO directly in front of the sun, you could completely create this little round shadow and block out the light. And for those people right in that area, because it's totally dark, the sun's light is not going to obscure the light coming in from the stars. So it could simply be a big ship that blocked off the light of the sun at that time, and using holographic projection technology. Now comes the big one. October 13th, 1917, the moment we've all been waiting for. Guess how many people showed up? 90,000 people showed up all at once. I was going to say 90 million, but it's 90,000. 90,000 people, even though it's pouring rain, terrible weather. That didn't stop them, because this was the big promised grand finale that everybody had been waiting for. The clouds were torn apart, revealing a vast expanse of blue sky. So they have some technology where they can, just beam the clouds apart, like the modern idea of weather modification, scalar electromagnetic technology. Clearly the ETs have that capability. The sun looked like a disk of dull silver. I have a website, divinecosmos.com. On my website is a book by Francois Masson called The End of Our Century, and in that book, which was actually published in 1983 by Donning Publishers, it was called The End of Our Era. I haven't been able to find copies of it on Amazon. It's all out of print. But you can read it on my website, and there's eyewitness reports of people seeing a disk. There's eyewitness reports of people seeing a disk of dull silver. Little rotating disk. It's actually wobbling in the air, and it's glowing. Very, very interesting. It had luminous, sharp edges, and it was visible to the naked eye. You could look at the sun and not go blind, because this ship was covering over the sun now. Now, this then trembled and spun like a wheel of fire. People start to get scared, especially when it begins throwing off incredible beams of colored light. It's this great miracle, but it's also so outside what people expect. These huge colors just beaming rays across the sky. It's a really wild light show. Totally, from one side of the sky to the other, you can imagine looking at this, what those people were seeing and how amazing it was. It goes on for 4 minutes. Now imagine if you had your camera phone and you're looking at this, just unbelievable. It stopped after 4 minutes, and then it started, and it gets even more crazy. It's now covering the entire sky. The whole sky is just lit up with 90,000 eyewitnesses seeing this. Why didn't we get disclosure right then? Well, we had an opportunity. They were trying to end World War I. That's what they were going for. The sun suddenly breaks loose and zigzags down towards the surface of the earth. And people are screaming, they're falling to their knees, they're crying, they're praying, because they think they're about to die. And this was really, in my opinion, just done for the drama, just done to sort of make it a really great story. Right as the ship is about to crash and hit the ground, it stops. It just boom, stops right in the middle of the air. And then people are still like really freaked out by this, and then it zigzags back up to where it had begun from. And everybody's going, oh my God, thank God, we thought we were all going to die. The entire phenomenon lasted 15 minutes. Now here's the punchline, get this. Every single person who saw this had become completely bone dry. The ETs had a technology that could release all the water. Let me try that again. The ETs had a technology that could release all of the water inside those people's clothes and make them completely dry. It appears that the same technology is being used for the formation of crop circles, where they pull water from the water table underneath the crop in order to stop the crops from burning. Because normally if you microwave grains like that, even though you see the growth nodes actually have little pits in them from burning, normally it would set the grain on fire. But this seems to be the same technology they're using. This is an actual photograph taken of that day as the sun is giving off all of its colors and 90,000 people witnessing it. This is actually the real photograph. Pretty amazing. So our human DNA is out there in the universe. It's a common genetic link that we have. And we are merging with the cosmos. These ETs are giving us a bridge into the future. They also tried to stop World War II through a similar intervention. World War II, again, was a terrible, terrible thing. Began September 1st, 1939. Japan surrendered September 2nd, 1945. 16 million Allied soldiers were killed. 45 million civilians were killed. 45 million civilians. Now, even the people who are Holocaust deniers, which I don't agree with at all, you cannot deny 45 million civilian deaths. It's crazy, the number of people who died. 8 million on the Axis soldiers died, and 4 million civilians. So the Allies actually took it a lot harder in this case. You have nasty warlords like Hitler, Stalin, out there causing these atrocities, but the ETs didn't want war. They made a big move in what's called the Battle of Los Angeles. And this began less than 3 months after the U.S. entered World War II. The Battle of Los Angeles happened on February 24th to 25th, 1942. And at one of my recent conferences, I had an eyewitness who was living in Los Angeles, an elderly lady, who saw the battle and heard these incredible gunshots. This is the photograph of what they were shooting at. They were shooting at it with all kinds of heavy artillery. As it flew over Los Angeles, nothing could touch it. You can actually see all the little lights as the bullets hit the force field around this UFO here. And here's a headline from that day: "Strange planes black out the Southland." They didn't know what this was. They thought it was some kind of enemy craft. The air raid sirens begin sounding on that night. A large orange-colored craft is hovering over Los Angeles. They said it looked like a jack-o'-lantern. The 37th Coast Artillery Brigade begins firing at 3:16 a.m., wakes up everybody because it's very, very loud. So nobody could sleep through this. They fired anti-aircraft shells, which are huge. They weigh 12.8 pounds each. And the firing continued for almost an entire hour. Over 1,400 shells were fired at this thing as it's in the air. Several buildings were damaged. 4 or 5 civilians were killed, not by the ETs, but by the shells as they fell. 3 people died from a heart attack. Now check this out. You can actually see where the shells are hitting the force field around the ship. And you can see the UFO inside the beam. And then especially when you take it into a false color image like this, you can clearly see there's a saucer in there. And this is a forensic reconstruction of what people saw based on eyewitness reports. Now, this is an LA Times headline where the Army said, yes, this was real. This is another headline of the air battle raging over Los Angeles. And here is a map of where this actually took place. It came in, starting right here. It flew over this way. It actually started down here. It flew all the way up Long Beach, over Santa Monica, and then went out over these islands out here. 2 days later, there was a historic memo between Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, General George Marshall. This is fascinating because what we're going to see is that they knew that this was not from Earth. The ETs are trying to stop us from having war. They want peace, and the government has to do something about it. So think about all the things I've showed you in this episode. We're going to get back to this tomorrow, and I'm going to take you through some of these modern-day ET sightings just in short summaries again. But what did the government know, and when did they know it? Send in your questions. I want to hear what you want me to talk about because I'm just setting the groundwork for our wisdom teachings. This is David.